In this video, I'm going to be talking about something I quite often get asked about, which is how to paint someone with darker skin. My model for this portrait is the handsome Riaz, lit with daylight from a north-facing window. And I'm going to be using a limited palette of just 3 colours: titanium white, transparent oxide red and ultramarine blue. This is the second portrait in my Alla Prima portrait painting course, so there's going to be a full-length version of this demo filmed in real time, available to watch over on my Patreon channel. After toning my canvas with a wash of transparent oxide red and ultramarine mixed with solvent, I'm next going to start mapping out my subject. Here you can see I've placed the whole of Riaz's head on the canvas, from the top of his hair all the way down to his collar. I'm then going to place the features within the head, starting with horizontal centre lines for the eyes and eyebrows and a vertical centre line that runs down the middle of the face. I'll use these centre lines to help me place the eyes, nose and mouth. But notice how I'm not going into any detail. In these early stages, I'm trying to keep the drawing broad and simple. Here, I'm indicating the shadow under the jaw, which is one of the only areas of shadow in this painting. Finally, I'm placing the collar on Riaz's white shirt. And now that my subject has been mapped out, I'm ready to go in with colour. Here, I'm mixing some ultramarine with transparent oxide red to create a black, which I'm going to use to start massing in Riaz's hair. Because the hair is so dark, I want to paint it transparently, and it's always easier to paint any transparent areas of your painting first, before applying opaque colour, as it will only need the tiniest amount of an opaque colour like white to get mixed into this black to make it look chalky and spoil the effect. I'm now using some of this black to mass in Riaz's dark eyebrows. And here I'm mixing another much warmer transparent dark made with transparent oxide red, which I'm going to use to mass in the shadows under Riaz's nose and jaw. With the hair and the shadows massed in, I'm now ready to mix the first of my flesh colours for the main area of light. I see this as a warm brown colour, mainly consisting of transparent oxide red and white. But the oxide red on its own would be too orange and saturated, so I'm also adding ultramarine to grey it down slightly. Now, even though this flesh colour is in the main area of light, it isn't actually a light, it's more of a midtone. And this is where it can sometimes be confusing when painting someone with darker skin. When we see a dark skin colour, we can make the mistake of thinking it's a shadow, when in fact it's in an area of light. This is why I'll often see students, when they paint someone with darker skin, mass in the lights with the same colour as the shadows. To avoid this mistake, instead of just thinking in terms of light and dark, we also need to be really aware of our subject's form and which parts are facing towards or away from the light source. I'm now mixing a much lighter, cooler flesh colour, which I'm using to place the highlights. Notice how the highlights appear quite a lot lighter than the colour I use for the main area of light. This is the most important characteristic of darker skin. You'll usually have a much wider range of values, so that your shadows, your main areas of light, which will be more of a middle value, and your highlights appear further apart from each other. Here I'm mixing a much cooler greyer middle value, containing a greater amount of ultramarine blue, which I'm going to use to mass in Riaz's beard. Now, for this portrait, Riaz has been lit so that both the front and the side of his head are receiving the same amount of light, and it's only the downward facing planes, like under his jaw, that are in shadow. In this case, it's actually the position of the highlights that fall on the corners of his head, in between the front and the side, that describe the form. And this is the main thing I want you to take away from this demo, to always be aware of your subject's form. You always need to be able to identify the shape and position of the shadows, lights and highlights, irrespective of how light or dark they are, because depending on the colour of your subject's skin, their actual value may be completely different. But the shadows, lights and highlights are always going to be there, even if the difference in value between them is really subtle. I've now got all the larger value masses that make up my subject blocked in. But before I continue, here you can see I'm using my palette knife to mix more of my main light colour. And here I'm mixing more of my highlight colour. By mixing big piles of each of my main values, it will save me from having to remix them later on in the painting. As I add more colours, they're essentially going to be warmer or cooler variations within each of the main values. So to mix new colours, all I have to do is adjust these existing piles of paint by adding either more transparent oxide red or more ultramarine. Here I'm mixing a new colour that's a middle value in between the highlights and the main area of light. And here you can see I'm putting out more paint. Another advantage of pre-mixing your colours with a palette knife is that it's a good way of making sure you use enough paint. Now there is a very important colour that should really be included in the blocking stage that I haven't added yet, and that's the background. But in this particular painting, the edge where the light background meets Riaz's dark eyebrow on the left side of his face is going to be one of the main centres of interest. So before adding the background, I'm first going to lock into the area around the bridge of the nose. Then I'm going to work outwards towards the eyes, making sure the distance from the bridge of the nose to the outside edge of the brow is correct before carving it out with some of the background colour. I'm now mixing a much lighter, cooler grey colour for the background. And now that I have the eyes and the eyebrows placed accurately, I'm going to start using the background colour to define the left side of Riaz's face. Here I'm mixing a slightly cooler version of my flesh colour for the main area of light, which I'm going to use for Riaz's lips. After placing the mouth, I'll then start refining the edges of the hairline and jaw. As I work on the rest of the portrait, I'll continue to look for variations in colour. As well as the differences in value appearing much greater, when painting someone with darker skin, you'll often see much more variation in colour. Because some colours appear really warm, others will appear comparatively cool. This will be particularly noticeable with the highlights, or if there are any reflected lights within the shadows, which if you're working under a cool light source will appear much cooler than the surrounding shadows. This means that portraits of people with darker skin can often be much more colourful than portraits of lighter skin models, who will tend to have more muted flesh colours. I'm now placing Riaz's ear. At some point, I'll do another portrait of someone with darker skin using an extended palette, and I'll try to push the colour much more. But for now, I thought I'd keep things simple with this limited palette, because the combination of warm transparent oxide red and cool ultramarine enables you to achieve a lot of temperature variation, which makes this quite an effective palette for mixing dark skin colours. Here I'm mixing a lighter, cooler version of my background colour, which I'm using to define the back of Riaz's hair and neck. I'm now mixing more of the black, made with ultramarine blue and transparent oxide red. And I'm using it to mass in Riaz's hair with a thicker layer of paint, making it even darker. Next, I'm placing the shadows under the collar of Riaz's white shirt. Here, I'm using a large soft head brush to mix more of the background colour, which I'm going to use to mass in the background to the left of Riaz's head. And here I'm mixing some of the black into the background colour to create a grey midtone, which I'm using to soften the edges of the hair against the background. Notice how this recreates the texture of the hair without needing to go into any detail and paint any individual strands. And now I'm painting the soft edge created by the eyelash on Riaz's left eye. Here I'm mixing a lighter version of my background colour, which I'm going to use for the background on the right side of Riaz's head, as I see there's a slight gradation in the background where it gets lighter as it moves from left to right. I am now mixing a white for Riaz's shirt. Notice how even though this is really light, it isn't pure white, and it still contains a small amount of ultramarine and transparent oxide red. After massing in the shirt, I'm then going to work on the collar. Finally, I'm going to add the last few details to the eyes. And with those last few touches, my portrait of Riaz is now complete. So I hope this was helpful. The main thing I want you to remember is to always pay attention to your subject's form, because even though a flesh colour may be dark, it could still be in an area of light. And if you want to see exactly how this portrait was painted, part 1 of the full-length version is available to watch over on my Patreon channel. Until next time, good luck with your painting, and thank you for watching.